Welcome, everybody, to this session of the Zoroastrian Trust Funds of Europe, the Zoroastrian Legacy Webinar Series. This is a series of talks by dynamic, learned speakers as an asset to the world and to the global Zoroastrian community. It also serves to link Zoroastrian associations of the world together, not just with each other, but to the academic world and to the general public, through a very precious understanding of the Zoroastrian consciousness and action in a way that is sustainable through time and looks at the various aspects progressing together, whether it's history, science, engineering, architecture, and governance, among other things. Today's speaker is Rastin Mehri. Rastin obtained his PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London in the UK, under the supervision of Professor Almut Hinze and the late Professor John Hinnels. His scholarship was partly funded by the Zoroastrian Trust Funds of Europe. Rastin also holds an MA in Biblical Studies, a BA in Religion Studies, and a BFA in Fine Arts from the University of British Columbia. His research interests include Persian and Arabic literature, Zoroastrianism, and he also studies Middle Eastern diasporas in Canada. He lives and works in Vancouver in British Columbia. Over to you, Rastin, and thank you very much for helping us appreciate today's concept on education in Sassanid times.
Thank you so much, Karishma, for your kind invitation. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you. Thank you also for all the wonderful audience here. Thank you ever so much. I have prepared a very brief presentation, which is, of course, based on an earlier presentation that I had done on the very similar topic for the North American Mobile Council almost a month ago. Without further ado, I'm going to begin. I have prepared this presentation for you. I hope, please forgive me if I go on tangents and afterwards, I so very much look forward to your thoughts and opinions and a brief discussion. It's a wonderful topic. It's a delightful, interesting discussion. My focus obviously will be on sonnets and specifically education, topic of education. I'm going to rely on a wonderful text, beautiful Pahlavi text. So that's going to be essentially a focus on the primary source. I'm going to upload the presentation. During this presentation, I will probably be, will disappear, but that's, I think, useful for us to focus on the actual presentation. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. So we begin, obviously, on a topic of education in specifically Sassanid Iran. What are the resources we have? I have here outlined for you what I'm going to cover today, ladies and gentlemen. Specifically, education in Sassanid context. What does that entail? Aspects of the elite, all-enveloping elite culture. I think that's important. Role of the culture. Of course, I'm going to focus on the positive role. And to do that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to focus specifically, as I just pointed out, on a lovely, lovely text. It's called Khosrow Kavatanud Ridaki, which literally means Khosrow, the son of Kavad, and Ridak in Persian means a young page. I'm gonna briefly mention sort of this notion of secular vis-a-vis religious education, as is exemplified in this wonderful, delightful text, Middle Persian text. Obviously, it's going to focus on military prowess. That was one of the curricula central curricula in education, we're told very clearly. And of course, what it is, I mean, we're going to focus on how closely connected they are, the all-enveloping elite culture and the notion of the education. So the elite culture entails also, we are told in this wonderful text, the description of the right form of entertainment, culinary arts, and indeed courtship even. Khosrow Cavatoriidaki, I'm gonna at the very end talk about how it actually may be one of the finest example of a classic of a folk tale and how it actually is defined, the notion of folk tale as is identified by Vladimir Prop. Without further ado, of course, we're going to focus on education in Sassanid Iran. Obviously, education, Rahang very much strengthened the elite culture and imperial administration, and it indeed has left a very lasting legacy on later scholarship within the Iranian plateau. Education was very much deeply tied with the good religion, Zoroastrianism, the social classes that were, of course, existed, and for the preservation and functioning of the administration of the Sassanid Empire and its governance, very much so. Formal schooling, that is the term we use, we actually encounter in this lovely text, Frahain Kardan, existed particularly amongst the nobility, clergy, the herbets, herbodon, and indeed the administrative scribes within the empire, the dabiran. Now, a little bit about the notion of the elite culture. It is often referred to as a high culture, refers to obviously practices, norms, values that are indeed passed down through standardized education by obviously the dominant group within the society. It represents refined, elevated, within the notion of this whole spectrum of the culture, in this context, focused on the Iranian plateau, as opposed to the mass of full culture. It is not just obviously focused on wealth, the sort of material wealth, but rather it's articulated through the notion of the cultural capital, which includes skills, knowledge, aesthetics, and that articulates and maintains this notion of the power. The aspect of the elite culture, particularly within the Iranian plateau, included, as we will be, as it's exemplified in this wonderful text, hunyakari, which literally means arts, fine arts. Yes, that includes medicine, dance, etc. Modern Persian, a lot of these terms are actually very much extant in modern Farsi with slight alteration. Hunyakari, Middle Persian, now it's in modern Farsi, Khonyagari, Dabiri or Tapiri, and Chagomak. Chagomak, which is again another very, very central practice, artistic practice in Persian culture of all times. It doesn't matter what era. It's poetry, obviously, very much pervasive now in modern Persian. Intellectual pursuit, philosophia, which is philosophia, and farahang, which is knowledge. Now, semantically drifted in modern Persian to mean culture. In Middle Persian, literally meant, yes, study, knowledge, academia. Education, yes, you have Frazana, Sakhwani, literally, essentially refers to not just multilingualism, but specifically being able to speak well. This would be perhaps, in my humble opinion, closest meaningful equivalent to rhetoric. So Frazanak Sokhvani was actually yeah, it's essentially rhetoric. It was part of the curricula because we are told here, and familiarity with religious text, exegesis of the Avesta, including its translation, which in Middle Persian is referred to as the Zand. There are, of course, another very most obvious aspect of the elite culture, all enveloping elite culture, is the formation of what was known at that time as Vaspuri. Vaspuri literally refers to as aristocracy or sophisticated manners. These includes etiquette of Khoresh Gunak or in modern Farsi Khoresh Gunagun. The same term is, and we actually are a section of this lovely text, not just focuses on the description and importance of culinary arts in ancient Iran, but also wine tasting. What kind of a wine was best, essentially, and that, and again, very much part and parcel of what would be construed as the aspect of the elite culture in ancient Iran. And not just very important to mention, highlight the existence of the institutions, because we are told again in this lovely text the existence of something called Frahangistan, which would indeed be the, in my opinion, closest meaningful equivalent to academia, Frahangistan. And through these, of course, we're told how there existed, yes, something called Brahm, which is would be, I would translate it as style, mode of living, mode of style of essentially what I guess you could say, equivalent of what you would open up as, when you open up through magazines like GQ in the Western world, contemporary Western world. This is obviously a cultivation, center, focus on taste. And in addition, Hushomandi, which literally means intellectual ability, pursuits. And we're told in this text, as an epitome of a form of elite culture, this notion of self-control, self-restraint by following the right protocols. And that is in Middle Persian, often referred to in this, specifically in this text, Vandodi. Now, the positive roles, obviously, elite culture in ancient Iran would be obviously the preservation of the cultural norms, Danish Kamkari, that was one, innovation and advancement, naturally through the preservation of art, and it's passed down through generation and different epochs within the plateau, aspirations, social aspirations, higher cultural standards, refinements. We actually have many books on this refinement belonging to different eras within the sort of context of Iranian history. And yes, shared elite culture, which very much helped in preservation of maintenance of existing ruling classes, diplomatic protocols, and communication, and so forth. These also very much trickle down into philosophical and moral protocols to elite culture, very much help this framework of ideologies and the notion of civilization, correct protocol. Now, if I may, ladies and gentlemen, to change gear here and focus on something obviously I'm very, very passionate about here, the actual text that we have, Khosrow Kawatan Ridaki, literally meaning Khosrow, son of a Kawad and a young page. Now, This text is um, uh, um, part of a series of texts called known as the Pahlavi texts. It these miscellaneous collection of texts were at one point edited. It received the last edition, most likely in the 10th, 11th centuries, Common Era, but composition obviously must have occurred sometime during the time of the Khosrow Anushiravan, or literally Khosrow the First, who is known as his epithet, very, very commonly known as Nushirvan, Anushirvan, and of course, very common Parsi name, Noshir, also is derived from it. This is, yeah, it's a story about the exchange of interaction between the king and a young page, a young boy. We are told, obviously, Khosrow here specifically, rendition in ancient Greek, Khosroes, and Anushiravan, Khosrow the First, where here is obviously the dates are 531 to 79. He ruled quite a number of decades, perhaps one of the longest. He was, in Arabic rendition, is Kisra, which later became in Arabic language the common term to refer to Sassanid kings in classical Arabic. Obviously,
Harjitaka,
the
oh
term
Dada,
is derived from from House Srawa, obviously from the Avestan, from specifically Yasht chapters of the Avesta, literally means a person of good fame. Um, and the epithet Anushak Ruvan or Anushiravan, as I just pointed out earlier, it is indeed a term, epithet, very common, Anushiravan, and we also, as I pointed out, very common Parsi name, Nosher. He was known as the philosopher king at one point. Perhaps on par with meaningful equivalent would be Marcus Aurelius, but he was indeed a contemporary Justinian. As we can see, we were told, obviously a brilliant administrator, and he was, very sort of one of these unique reform was that he actually wrested power away from the nobility and tried to at least, perhaps meritocracy. And we are told the story begins by Ridak, the term Persian. We have Vachak, which is now modern Hindian Farsi, Bacha. Uh, Bachak, Ridak. Ridak literally means post-pubescent. And you have also Kudak, which is prepubescent. And you have Abornog and then Borna. These are the different sort of stages in Middle Persian, and it's of course continues on in modern Farsi. So he's referred to as a ridak, it means post-pubescent, so a kid who had just hasn't really grown beard yet, a boy. And the narrative begins when he comes to before the Shohanshah, King of Kings, Khosrow Shiravan, the emperor, and essentially tells him, "Look, I have qualification. Please give me a job." And part of his qualification, we're told from the very beginning, ladies and gentlemen, is his education. In addition to education, he talks about his capabilities in terms of military prowess, and of course, his ability to identify what is the right protocol in terms of culture, elite culture, his ability to, his knowledge essentially of what is the right culture in Iran at that time, and his familiarities thereof. Through a series of questions, the king tests the redacts, the young page's education, qualification, and at the very end, most important, his character. Whether he is going to be a good person, a good hire for the job. And we are told, and of course, a wonderful here through these lovely dialogue, a beautiful description of ancient education, a very unique illustration of what could be construed as an all-enveloping elite culture in Iran and indeed education. Now, if I may, I'm going to, my apologies if the experts here present, I'm going to recite in original Middle Persian. But before I begin the text, I would like to mention the fact that it is a quintessential expression of Sassanid elite culture. And what it does is we are here from the very beginning, are told that part of the education is, yes, religion. Sacred knowledge immediately right after focuses on the martial arts. All the boys at that time, I suppose, had to go to this academia in addition to learning how to read, write, recite, and do other things in terms of knowledge. They also had to be trained as warriors, as knights, as soldiers. And then move on. The education is part of it, also part of the curricula as courtly etiquette, aesthetics, and refinement. And we are told that these indeed very much served as a very, very pervasive, powerful ideological tool in Iran's Zoroastrian heritage, very much so. So this is a text. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin selections of this text. We begin with this beautiful passage. ایران وینارد کودک ریدک ایو وسپور خوش آرزونا. So literally means resided in Iran, a young page of noble name. And then we're told this curious name. Khosh Arzu literally means happy hope, hopeful desire. He lived in Iran at that time. And I actually, if I may, for those of us who read Farsi, I write Farsi here to show how close these two languages are remarkably. And here it goes on saying, Dastir Kash. Perhaps that's one of the protocols in ancient Iran. Because you see, the Iranian court is often described in other sources. I'm referring to specifically here ancient Greek sources as a practice that existed. Often Greek texts from different, specifically in ancient Greek texts, were referred to as a practice of proskounesis, which literally meant that when people or notable would actually appear before the king, they had to proselytize, they had to prostrate, they had to fall down. We're told here in this royal sort of practice, that's actually it was not existing, absolutely not. The protocol was to have dast erkash, literally means to lower your hand. Dast erkash. پیش شاهنشاه ایستاد. Very clearly, this young page stands lowering his hand, his arms. He stood before the king. So we're told here that notwithstanding what the ancient Greek authors often refer to as the practice common within Iranian plateau of individual demeaning themselves before the King of Kings by falling prostrate before the king. That's not actually what was happening. The protocol was for this young page to stand before the king whilst lower his arm. So اوش ستایش اود آفرین ایوز کرد. He basically began, again, part of the protocol in ancient Iranian court, he had to praise and give blessing, give homage to the king. He said to the king, اوش گفت کو شاهنشاه انوشک و جاویدان هفت کشور خدای اود کامک انجام بید. O king, he said to the king, it's from the protocol, O King of Kings, may you be immortal, Anushak. Javidan essentially means living forever, yes. Haft Kishvar Khudai, that's again something coming from the ancient Avestan text. the 7 continents. The term Kishvar in Middle Persian meant, of course, continent, but in modern Farsi, everything is shrunk. In modern Persian, it actually means country, but in Middle Persian meant continent. So may you be the Lord of the 7 continents, and may you always be satisfied. You always be satisfied. And he says to the king, Framayit Nyukhshida. Please, O king, deign to listen to me. Listen to what I am about to say. He says, Dudak ki man ush budom, azadi yazadan. That's another lovely expression we have in Middle Persian, which of course now it's obsolete. So it says, Azadi yazadon yakan shumaira. Shumara. So literally means, yes, the ancestors from whom I descended. Not on account of free will, but thank to God, in praise to God and your ancestors, the good work of your ancestors. Hamak nomik ot tavangaru komak zivasht Buddha. So they essentially says, thanks to God, yes, equivalent of thank God, and the activity of your predecessor, your ancestor, perhaps referring here to the Kavod, the father of Khosran Shiravan. They were well-spoken, wealthy, powerful, and lived a happy life. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, here he's essentially indicating his descent. He is not an aristocrat. He is not member of the nobility. He is, based on my interpretation, he's a Iranian fellow from the family, albeit the Vaspurnam, a name of noble descent. He lived in Iran. And goes on saying they're essentially Ushan cheese pad aboyesh nachishra istod. Literally means they basically their material needs were essentially met and they prospered. They basically lived a good life. And then he says, unfortunately, my father, whilst I was immature, Apurno, he passed away. So I lost my dad when I was very young, and my mother, apart from me, had no other sons. I was the only son of my mom, and goes on saying that yes, from what was left from my, of course, inheritance, what was left of me, because of what was in it was sufficient for me to actually have a good style of living. Brahme Sitab, essentially saying Brahme Khub Chopok. So essentially, yes, I had tasted variety food, and my fashion style mode of my lifestyle was very good, was well, thanks to what was afforded to me after the sort of like my inheritance, through my father's inheritance. And here he goes on talking immediately about describing culture and particularly education, Frahan Kardan. I'm here like to mention that as part of the practice of Frahan Kardan, he includes Yashtu, Hadukhtu, Bagonu, Vendidod. That's remarkable. As part of his education, he had to study Haduch Nask. We know that Haduch is obviously a very important passage from the collection of Avesta, now lost. And Vagon. Vagon is actually the triptych important prayers as it exists even today. Ahonovaiti, that is Ahonvar prayer, Yatahu prayer, including Hashem Vahu, which still remains the most pervasive prayer in Zoroastrianism today, and Yenke Hatam, whom all Zoroastrians today are very familiar with. So these actually were part of his religious education. And he also mentions, as I'm going to later go through the passage and selection of the passage and read, خوب نپی رگی نپی باریک و دانش کمک. And essentially these are skills for writing. He basically says, I was well trained in reading, writing, and was very much trained especially in playing chess, chaturanga, chatrang, and of course Nev Artaxshir, which is again backgammon, which is an Iranian game. I have here one of the logos that still exists today in Iran. Today, it's a modern, essentially, logo of the Tehran University, which was very much inspired by one of the stuccos that was later found in Ctesiphon. So basically, the narrative goes on, indicating that when it was time for education, for academia, پرهنگام او فراهنگستان کردن بودم بعد فراهنگ کردن سخت اوشتاف بودم. So it says when it was time for my education, I was an amazing student. I studied. I was very eager and studied really hard in my studying, in my academic activities. And then goes on specifically saying, as part of the curriculum of his studies, ladies and gentlemen, that he actually studied Yash, the prayers, the Yash chapter of the Avesta, Hadochto, Bagon, and Vendidad. Wonderful. Vendidad, as we all very familiar here in the very important chapter of Vesta, doubt dispelling exposition, and Hirbodivan. So just like a religious scholar, I memorized that. Van literally means I memorized the prayers, Jaja, different sections of the Zand, Nuchshid Astad. I have heard different sections of the Vendidad. So in addition to the fact that he actually had memorized the important prayers, he actually, as part of his education, he had listened to Zan, that is translation, Middle Persian translation of the Avesta, including, of course, the Vendidad. So he has listened to please note, it's so curious that he obviously doesn't say he hasn't listened to all of it, because it's very long indeed. He has listened to different sections, and he's skilled just like, obviously, like a priest, scholar, learned scholar, Herbodi. So that's that. He moves on saying, of course, later, dabiri angun ku khub nabi o ragi nabi. I, goes on saying, remember, he's before the king and he's trying to sort of impress the king through his skills, his education, and he's basically saying, I have a wonderful skill. I'm a very wonderful skilled writer. I write. I'm a wonderful scribe. I write very well and very neat. Barik ragi napi, barik o danish kaman. I'm very knowledgeable. I write beautifully. I write very, very good. And of course, hu angusht o. And then here's again that amazing text that was, of course, introduced in the very beginning, Frazanig Sochanam. So he's essentially articulating, ladies and gentlemen, that he is actually trained as a rhetor, as a speaker, as an eloquent speaker. And as, of course, in pre-modern time, rhetoric was very, very central. If you wanted to move up, essentially, in the field of academia, you had to become a rhetor. And Frazanik Sochvan is another. What would be equivalent in modern Persian? Farzan Sochan. Wonderful. So these are his training, and then of course moves on to military prowess, which obviously was one of the curricula of in ancient Iran for young boys, for male students. He mentions Asfori, Kamanvari, or Nizakvari. Literally means knighthood, riding horses, shooting arrows, and throwing spears. These are one of the things that were, of course, required training for young boys. In addition, Shamshir, Ajdar, and Chakosh, to use these tools. Shamshir obviously means sword, Ajdar means spear, and Chakosh would probably mean hammer or axe. So yes, military prowess is another very important part of the curriculum. He mentions, in order to impress the king and secure employment, he says, I am a very, very good, skilled horse rider, a knight. And also, I'm wonderful, skilled in shooting arrows, and and a person who's able to pass by the side of my horse should be considered a very, very fortunate person indeed. Yes. He goes on mentioning that he's a very, very skilled spear thrower, and that person who wishes, who dares to come close to him in terms of go up against him to fight with him with sword or spear would, alas, be considered a very, very unfortunate fellow, because inevitably he will be destroyed and defeated. Yes. And after, impressing the king through all these sort of, qualification, he's now obliged to actually talk about and mention his training, his background in refinement and a taste, entertainment. Hunyakori, which in modern Persian it's still used today, khanyagari. There it is, music and entertainment, and in general arts. He says he essentially impresses the king by saying that, look, I am a very skilled lyre player, flute player, and yes, tambour. This is very, very popular to this day, very much important a musical instrument in the Iranian plateau today. It's called tambour, still same name. He's singing srood, essentially singing songs. Chagomak, which again means poetry. He's very good at, reciting poetry. Another lovely term, payvasta guftan. I'm not quite sure what kind of art this is. It's some form of a recitation, payvasta guftan, repetition. Perhaps it's some kind of art whereby you start reciting poems, composing poems, essentially, sort of like, on the side without really a composition previously. And paybazi kardan. That is literally, paybazik literally means dancing. Paybazik kardan, and he's essentially boasting that he's extremely proficient. He's an expert. He goes on saying that, which is remarkable, that he is very, very skilled in chatrang, which in modern Persian and Arabic, it's referred to shatranj. The word later goes to Europe as chess. The very first, earliest accounts of chess, in my humble, I think I'm correct by saying that it's actually a Middle Persian text, saying that yes, its origin is indeed from India. Chaturanga literally means four flanks. And he says that he's very, very skilled in playing of the chess, as well as the backgammon, chess and backgammon. And he's so good that he's actually skilled and superior to all of his peers, his equals, his comrades, his classmates. So he's able to actually beat them all in these two wonderful games, ancient games. He goes on saying, of course, yes, that he is also very much trained in the art of astrology and astronomy, that he actually is very much trained in reading and interpreting the movement of not just stars, but planets. So Targono Abochtaran. He is so skilled that actually he is could be compared to a person who is does this job for a living. So he's actually an expert chart reader, which was clearly a skill very much valued in ancient times and indeed in modern times. You actually, many friends actually very much enjoy indulging in reading the tarots and stuff like that. So. But alas, he says, as he's describing his training, his background, he mentions that, alas, unfortunately, everything went to and everything denigrated. His condition became very bad indeed. Yes, essentially saying that yes, the money ran out. Yes, my essentially. My family sort of the circumstances became very much reduced. My mother, alas, passed away. If you seem appropriate in your opinion, O Lord, and Yazdon Palom is another beautiful obsolete expression in Middle Persian, obviously. If it seems appear to you, right to you, if it seems appropriate to you, if you could please deign to attend to my circumstances, essentially give me a job. He's saying, I have a PhD, so please give me a job. Now, the king has to test him. He's, of course, he's been impressed through this young page's education, training, etc., and military prowess. But now the king has to engage in a very interesting, curious discussion with this young page, essentially testing him about his background. The main focus begins by Khoreshne Gunak Gunak, modern Persian Khoreshne Gunagun, literally means different kinds of tastes of foods, and Brahma Khubu Chopok, that is obviously good and competent style. He really is what he's expressing to be. Now, goes on stating that, ladies and gentlemen, شاهن شو اوریدک گفت کو تو ریدک ایدون خوش آرزو ای تو خوی به خورشن و خوشبران برحمک و خوب و چابک اندر بود استاد بگوی کو خورشن کدام به او به مزیکتر. Now, the king says to the young page, you have expressed, how you are, good style and good education, etc. Now tell me, what is the most tasty food in your opinion? What is the most, best, tastiest food? And the young page goes on here, گوید ریدک کو انوشک و هفت کشور خدای کمک انجام فرمایید بودن. Again, another beautiful formula, protocol to say to the king. His answer to the king's inquiry about what is the best food to eat, I absolutely love it. He says that food is best and most delicious is the one that is actually consumed in health and without worry, and indeed in gorosnegi, in when you're hungry. So the best food is the one that you eat when you're hungry, without fear, and when you're healthy, obviously. That is, of course, something very beautiful, very true, and very full of proof, in my humble opinion. But then he goes on to details. Yes. Details about what is the best kind of food, and it gives a very, very beautiful, lovely description of not just different foods in ancient Iran, but also different taste of wines, flowers, desserts, which of course I'm sparing you with not really mentioning it. One of the things that really caught my attention, and not just not long ago, I believe in Orange County in America, recently the Department of Iranian Studies, they actually sought to actually recreate these dishes. At one point during the party in the university, I think in Orange County in California, they actually prepared this. So one of them is a beautiful description of this lovely, yes, meat of a lamb, a 2-month-old lamb, which is, of course, um, raised in the mother's milk or milk of a cow. And then it is raised and, of course, stripped, plucked, marinated, and rubbed in a juice, some kind of juice, which, of course, I have no idea what it is. And yeah, yes, this the sugar of Tabarzan, which I believe it exists in Dekhoda's encyclopedia of modern Persian. So, and what's unique is after all these descriptions that the young page expresses to the king Shahanshah pasandid ush padrost dasht. So the king agreed and believed this to be true. All the things that, so the kid passes all these tests. Another fascinating aspect of the elite culture and all-enveloping elite culture in this text, through obviously education, that is courtship. The king asks of the young page, which woman is best? Zani e kudam bih. And the the text here is remarkable. It's the 12th question. That was the پرسید کویزن ای کدام به. Literally 12th question was asked from the young page, what is the best woman? And thereby goes through this description, rather graphic. I'm going really, really fast, but what's remarkable is the very beginning, the young page articulates that, yes, the best woman, of course, from the viewpoint of a man, is a lady who actually prefers the company of a man, a woman who likes men to be with a man. And then, of course, goes on to the description of the physical attributes, which somewhat is obviously universal and maintains through different ages. Yes, the full, some breasts, well proportioned, and so forth. And that's that. Now, it goes on, of course, at the very end, the king once again agrees and believes that all the proclamations of the young page are true, are correct. Now, what's remarkable is here you have another fascinating discussion. The king here says something very, very curious to the young page. He says to the young page, goodness, you are so materialistic. Madik madak komaki. That is remarkable. Oh, you have described these things and the ladies, etc. You seem to be very, very, very materialistic. That is, I think it's a very fascinating dimension to this text that, yes, here's a king judging the young lad, saying that, well, you are so preoccupied with physical things and attributes, to which the young kid, young lad, answers a remarkable, retorts a remarkable answer. He says, "Anushak bid mardon pahlom, man on 10,000 kanizak and so essentially says, oh no, oh young Lord, you're telling me materialistic, whereas actually I'm just giving a snippet description of your court, which is dominated by, of course, there's another formula, 10,000 maidens who are at your royal pavilion, and their ultimate desire is to bring you pleasure and serve you." And and of course the king is it accepts itself, obviously, but the story is not done, because it essentially changes gears to a description, a fascinating, beautiful description of a narrative of a trial and proof of quality of before the king. Whether you are really, really worthy. Yes, you're well-trained, etc. But what about your character? Passes on. After a few months has passed, the young page returns back to the king and says, "Thank you so much, O king, because after the previous meeting a few months ago, the king had given him some money, because of his, wonderful, but he has not yet given him an employment, a permanent position." So he comes back to the king after a few months and begs the king, "Oh, King of Kings, thank you so much for the wonderful stipend you gave me as part of from your wonderful treasury. If it's not too much, please deign to sort of help me out, essentially give me an employment. I want more." Deign to look into my situation, examine, and and the king was engaged in that. And the happy coincidence was that at that time, the royal stable comes, the head of the royal stable comes to the king and reports that, "Oh, King of Kings, there has been 2 lions who have come to the area of the royal pasture for royal stables and has caused havoc." And the king immediately says to the young page that, yes, you have to do something. You have to prove your worth. You have to prove that you're able to show your character in practice. I charge you to go and capture those lions and bring it before us to the court. So yes, and of course the young page departs immediately to pursue and do that. Now, here's what would be the number one interesting plot, as is exemplified in Vladimir Props's morphology of the folk tale. Ridak Pat Hamzamon should, the young page immediately left. But here's the unique thing. In the way, on the road, in wilderness, the young page meets a gorgeous, lovely lady. So, and در راه زنی did bas uchef oniku. So on the road, he ran into a very beautiful lady who was gorgeous and lovely. And he said to the young page says to the young lady, "If it seems appropriate to you, if you would allow me, may I please make love to you?" It's curious, of course. It also shows some sort of protocol, elite protocol in Iranian, at that time, ancient times. "If it seems proper to you, would you allow me to sort of make love to you, get close to you, and etc." And the young lady obviously retorts to the Ridak, and here's, of course, where the redact or the young page is supposed to show his quality. He says to the lady says to the page that if you accept all my sins that I have accumulated so far, you accept them. And in exchange, you let me accept, you give me, hand over to me all the good deeds, kerfak, kerfe in modern Zarathushtri parlance, kerfe. If you accept to give me all your good deeds, good deeds, good activities that you have accumulated, I will allow you, I would consent to sort of make love to you, if you would accept that. And but what happens, of course, here is the redact shows his true character by practicing, obviously, self-control, and he basically redact and در نیز زمان از پیش آن زن بازگشت او رفت و آن ورن به نی گذارد. So به نی گذارد. So the young page says, no, thank you so much. No, that is not a deal for me. And he walks away, he runs away, goes away, and does not indulge in his varan, which is essentially lust. So here is, of course, is depicting his good character, which is indeed later reported to the king after he has actually captured the two lions and appears before the king. And the king, of course, at that time, when he hears the report of his activity, particularly the episode with him meeting this gorgeous young lady, the king bestows to the young page a position in court, yes, and keeps this young page close to him at all time, and makes him essentially as a marzban at one point, yes, Shahanshah. And then at the very end says, may the king be immortal. It's again another formulae that was used in Middle Persian, ending Frazov bedrud shodi u romesh. It concluded in happiness, calm, peace, and pleasure. That essentially, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. My apologies for taking too long in describing this remarkable, beautiful text. If you have any questions, please, thank you ever so much. I'll be delighted to discuss and to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rastin Mehri, for your talk today. We're grateful to all the participants and to Zoroastrians.net for sharing these recordings. We will open. Please put your digital hand up as required. I've had one question from Professor Andreas Toledo, so we'll start with Professor Andreas Toledo. And we're building this in a series of talks, so thank you to all our previous speakers also in this lovely legacy series. Professor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehri, for this very interesting presentation, very clearly and very nicely presented. I had a very minor question related to several other questions, but I don't want to take much time because I know that there are many questions from the audience and I prefer to leave space for that. But just a really minor thing. At the very beginning, you mentioned the position of the hands when talking to the king. If I'm not wrong, is dast kash. And this is a very interesting topic to discuss, because there are some scholars who think, I don't know if you agree or not, that's what I wanted to ask you, that it is obviously, as you mentioned, not a proskinesis or not a way of bowing in front of the king in a kind of very humble attitude, which of course is a sign of respect in the Sasanian court. But on a very different level, agreeing with the iconography of the Sasanian period too, is a position like this. So that's kash, what means actually is having the hands below kash, the armpits. So it's a kind of position of respect that you also see among the people belonging to the court, when the king is depicted or a noble person is depicted in the Sasanian reliefs and in Sasanian iconography, you very often see this type of position, which is actually a sign of respect. So
that's
some
right.
scholars
It's
think
everywhere in
that,
the iconography. That's right. In the plates
exactly,
and inscriptions. Yes, quite right.
exactly. So some scholars connect this passage in the text you were reading with that iconographic
gesture, yes.
depiction of the people in the court, and also with a very interesting passage in the Arda Biras Noamak, in which he also appears like that in front of the audience when he comes back from the other world trip. So do you think that
That's
that might be
right.
related?
Absolutely. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Andres Toledo. It's absolutely correct. Yes. Thank you so much for pointing that out.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Firdosh Mehta next. Please go ahead, Firdosh.
Yes.
If
Uncle
anybody has any takeaways to build the discussion, we'll come to that after the specific question to the speaker. Right now, let's focus on specific short questions to our speaker. Firdosh, over to you.
Well,
No, Mehta.
your last comment sort of got me to stop and wait till you come back to what you want to. So maybe I can ask, but Rastin, you know, I'm very, very fond of learning from you. Amazingly, every time I listen to you, I learn something.
Thank you very much.
Maybe because I'm asleep in the previous program and you wake me up in this one. But it's really, really nice to understand, and I have no idea of any of the old Persian or new Persian, not even Farsi languages, but still the way you explain and make us understand the kind of discussions you have, translations you have, it makes it so interesting even for an ignorant guy like me. So please live long and keep doing it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mehta. God bless you. Thank you so much. Absolutely.
Over to you, our very, very erudite author. Go ahead, Nev.
Thank you. Thank you. I was interested in trying to understand gender equality because apparently our religion does have that as a basic, tenet in the Gathas. However, the story does not seem to reflect that. It is pretty much a patriarchal society that we're looking at, except for the question, which was a bit of a plot twist. At the end, the lady does not say, "Will you marry me?" or anything about, do you have a good family? Or she asks, "Will you take my sins and will you give me your good deeds?" And that is a profound question, a wonderful question, and a very assertive question. I mean, my God, will you take on all my sins? Your comments, what did you think of that question?
Absolutely. I cannot find, I'm also teaching the Department of World Literature at Simon Fraser University. I have not come across anything, any description narrative of such. You cannot, in so-called loosely defined as the Judeo-Christian or Western literature, and indeed in other literature that I know of, whereby you have this a lady having so much agency. And please note the context. She's in the wilderness. We're not told why she's on her own, an Iranian woman in the wilderness. She gets approached by a young lad, and the young lad says to her, "Oh my God, you're so hot. Can we have a relationship?" And she says, "Well, on the condition." Yeah, she has agency. She has, it's quite remarkable. You're quite right. It's remarkable, yes. I have not come across anything similar to this in any form of literature, not just traditionally in Persian literature. You have something, if I may use the term post-Islamic text, something that is somewhat equivalent to it. You have a text. It's composed in modern Persian poetry. It's composed by someone called Gurgani or Giorgiani. It is called Viseu Romin. It's a romance, but it's, of course, apparently, according to some experts, was used as a blueprint for later romances, particularly later Islamic romances like Khosrow and Shirin and Layli and Majnun, and also not just that, but Kritistan in Isolde, because it predates all of them. And here you have another example of a lady, a heroine, who has agency. Hero and heroine make love, but outside wedlock. That too is remarkable. So yeah, something could be construed indeed about the position of generally women at that time in that particular context in ancient Europe. But you're quite right now. Yes, it's a very remarkable and curious story. Yes, indeed, the society, without a doubt, was patriarchal, without a doubt. I mean, you have military prowess. And when you think in context, the wars that existed, that was ongoing, boys had to go to war and probably die, fight, but yet you have this society that actually, it's remarkable, that gives that much agency to a woman. Yes, Iranian woman. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is turning into an extremely interesting discussion. Dr. Kerman Daruwala, and like you said, in the Keshwar, I think we're reaching 7 continents today, almost. Yes. Over to you, Dr. Daruwala.
Hello, Rastin. Thank you very much. It was a fascinating.
My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. My question was to do with the background of the text, as in when was it written, and what was the sort of the purpose of highlighting this? I mean, the page is given qualities which are exceptional on all fronts. So was it more like a sort of a reflection of what the education would have been, or was it a more idealized sort of scenario which was painted in maybe a later era? So if you can just throw some light on the authorship and the context in which it was written.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating, amazing question. You could actually write a whole dissertation about this particular question. We have in works of literature, as is exemplified, say even the most basic, we're all here very familiar with works of Shakespeare. You have these sort of protocols that is often articulated and maintained and preserved through what could be referred to as construed as an all-enveloping elite culture. And the purpose of this text, perhaps, one of the purposes of this text is, again, pointing out to this sort of notion of what was the all-enveloping elite culture at that time in Iran. You have this notion of, yes, in this culture, yes, the training, yes, in the very beginning, the kids probably in Frahangistan, when they had to be trained, number one, in religion. But, it doesn't go into details, because why the work of religion was done for unique priests, which it seems to me to have been an hereditary position, as it exists today in modern Iran and India, because you have to be a Mobedzadeh generally for you to become a Mobed. That's not Mobed Yar, but generally Mobedzadeh. But you have here perhaps wonderful snippets of example of what was essentially could be construed as a standardized education in that context, in that Iran. Now, as to the purpose, the causal, again, it's debate. It could be debated. What was the cause of this? Well, why did they need the requirement for mentioning? This is probably to emphasize, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning introduction, that yes, there is such a thing as elite culture, all-enveloping, because you have examples in different parts of the world. When you study different regions, you realize, yes, there are different elite cultures, but there is not one that was all-enveloping. So essentially, you have in this sort of locality, different regions did different things. But here you have, in my humble opinion, especially after the formation of the centralization of state under the Sassanids, you have, again, something could be construed as an all-enveloping elite culture that transcended boundaries, dialects, languages, etc. In fact, one of the things we see about Sassanids, they centralized Iran, what we understand as the notion of Iran, or at that time Iran Shah, that exists today is all because of what had happened and written and done in Sassanid era. The Persian language today is very much direct descendant of that standardized language. And that, of course, led to the destruction, albeit perhaps inadvertently, destruction of other cultures that existed in Iran. So other cultures sort of waned away and gave their place to what became later standardized culture. And that these texts, perhaps number one, the things that they do is essentially this. And as to the text, as I mentioned, it's part of this miscellaneous collection of what we refer to as a Pahlavi text. Composition, as I pointed out, must have been sometime during or after the time of the Anushiravan, Khosrow Anushiravan, so definitely 6th century. I hope I answered the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
My pleasure.
Rastin. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So I'm going to give people time to raise their hands so that I can unmute them rather than putting them on the spot. But before that, if I could just bring our attention to the tale of Noshirwane Adil, the just, and just reflect on that as we go into the next session of discussion of people sharing their ideas. There was a story when an old lady built her hut very close to the palace compound, and the smoke from her hut was staining the palace wall. And then Noshirwane Adil, the just, this is a typical example of charity with good governance, was asked to investigate it, and he could have told her to move her hut, made somebody whitewash the wall or whatever. Instead, he chose to have a crooked palace wall that protected this lady, her dignity, and laid an example for history to say, protect people, look after them, be the nurturer, not somebody who destroyed. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think in one of our previous discussion, Karishma, a while back, we mentioned this notion of Kshatriya Vairya, which is also one of the aspects of the Aura Mazda, the good governance. The most important thing for a society to exist, to well-functioning the society, is this beautiful ancient conception of Avestan Kshatriya Vairya, modern Farsi Shahrivar. It's essentially, yes, good governance to do what is right, even though it's, we are told in this story, and I think it's from much later narratives, post-Islamic narrative about Anushiravan refusing. I mean, when the old lady refuses to sell his property to Anushiravan accepts it and just essentially, he boasts in one of his sort of like interaction with a minister from another country, apparently from a Byzantine Empire, who comes and points out what is happening here. And Anushiravan boasts and says, no, this is something I did, and I'm proud of the fact that this lady refused to sell it to me, so I had to, build around it, to show the blemish, and that is show the sign of the justice. Yes, as I pointed out earlier in the introduction, Anushiravan would, in Iranian context, would be something, perhaps an equivalent of one of the most popular good emperors of the ancient Rome, the Marcus Aurelius, who was a philosopher king, who was an Anushiravan. We know, based on historical narratives, etc., that he was indeed one of the best kings, and he set his aim to actually do good governance. He limited, we know that much, one of his reforms that is often mentioned in later narratives, that he actually limited the power of the nobility, and sought to create this system based on meritocracy, based on merit. And we have another very popular story, albeit often it's expressed as a denigration of when a man who's actually like a laborer or a cobbler who comes to the king and says, "Oh, king, I'll give you this amount of money if you would allow me, donate this money, if you would allow me, my son, to enter this particular academy and become a minister." And the king refuses, even though he needed the money. He said, "No, because that academia is based on meritocracy. You cannot purchase position. You cannot purchase position. It has to be based on merit." And the king refuses this, albeit in other texts it's actually mentioned, oh, it's because of he was not of the right caste in the society, thereby he was not allowed education, the young lad. But it actually goes against it. That's not true. As I mentioned, as this text itself mentions, in the beginning we are introduced to this young page. It says he has, of course, good name, Vaspur nom, but he himself is not Vaspur. He is like an average fellow, based on my reading of the text. Vaspur Khoshar nom. He's not he's just basically, and he basically says that his ancestors were well off because of the good governance of your ancestors. That is remarkable. That is true.
You have addressed the very contentious concept, particularly in today's day and age, of elitism versus elite education. Beautiful. Elite education, not elitism.
That's
and
right.
Merit with equity of opportunity, which is good, rather than meritocracy, which can feed into a concept that may not be very positive. So you've answered two very modern, you captured the zeitgeist of education in today's world. Thank you. We will now move into the discussion section. We will have Firdosh Mehta and Mabadyar Manek Bhujwala, and then Simin, and then take the questions from the chat. So, Firdosh, are you ready? Mabadyar Manek Bhujwala, may I call upon you first? Again, just remembering that we are focusing on education, everyone. No concepts that deviate from the concept of education, please.
Thank you for your presentation. As always, very informative. I was just thinking that, the word Farhang, I used to associate it with culture, but apparently that can also be used for education or culture, depending on the context.
Yes, thank you so much for mentioning this. In my opinion, no, it's as you know, there's something called semantic drift in all languages. We have one word over time, it's semantically, its meaning alters. And in my humble opinion, it's another example of semantic drift is, again, Farhang. In modern Persian and likely in Parsi Gujarati too, the word Farhang, it means culture. Yes, but originally it was. It actually referred to Frahang in this context. As we said, we're very, very clear here in this text in the very beginning, says O zaman pad Frahang kardan. So when it was time for no culture has nothing to do, when it was time for education, Frahang kardan, to actually do the act of education, he was sent to Frahangistan.
And also, what language is the script? Is that in Pahlavi script or Avestan script?
Yes. No, the script is Middle Persian, which is also referred to as Pahlavi. Avestan is just a different language.
Right. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mabadyar Sahib Bhujwala, for your question and the lovely answer. Simin, over to you. Simin? I will read out Simin's question. When you're ready to unmute, please do feel free to unmute. Simin says, how much did religious influence the content of education, especially subjects like medicine and philosophy?
We have very scanty text with regards to philosophy and education collection. Some are indeed kept and collated in Dinkat, act of religion. Yes. Well, if I understand the question, yes. You have here in this text, which I would sort of highlight the fact that it's a secular text, without a doubt. It's a secular text about activities of interaction of a young page with the King of Kings, the Emperor. Religion, perhaps not the actual act of religion or religiosity, but what I would say that it's really permeates into text and other texts, other Middle Persian texts, is perhaps not so much religion, but culture. Zoroastrian Mazdyasny culture. It permeates through this text and other texts. You see that one thing we mentioned was brought up earlier, and thanks so much for bringing this up. Earlier, we talked about this curious narrative about the interaction between this lady in the middle of wilderness when the young lad is going to hunt lions, and she's just a beautiful lady and has agency, etc. You encounter that, in my humble opinion, something that is sanctioned. You read the Avesta, the Gathas especially, the same right, identical agency and power is afforded to both genders. Avestan, passages you read in the Gathas, very clear, indeed, also specifically Yasnapton Haiti, very clear that there is no, one subordination, dominance between the two genders. They are the same. They're essentially equal. And you see that in a way, perhaps, in these narratives, which, of course, once again, I have to highlight, Iranian culture at that time, in that context, clearly was patriarchal culture. I mean, for a preservance of the empire, you had to have armies. You had to, learn Razmobaz. You had to learn Razm. You had to learn to fight, and obviously, men were the chosen. So yes, that's perhaps. I hope I didn't digress from the answer, but it's very much. Please.
That's absolutely fine. And I love the way you brought in the Gathas. There was a question from RD, that is possibly Mr. Rusi Dalal, one of our past speakers, about the Gathas, and you preempted his question with your answer. So the text that Professor Rastin Mehri refers to, in addition to the Yasna Haptan Haiti, is Yasna 51, verse 22, talking about equity of opportunity and honor given to people irrespective of gender. So that's in the Vahuksha Gatha. And the current prayer that he did mention earlier is the Yange Hatam prayer. So as you can see, governance, education, and a way of life, which Professor Mehri correctly refers to, as always, as the Yasna path, are very much a way of living ethically with honoring the merit in other people. Firdosh Mehta, you had a question and a point of discussion. May I hand over to you, please, sir?
Thank you, Dr. Karishma. I have discussed this topic with Rastin on a private level. I am seriously nowadays intrigued, and I know there are a couple of other people who have the same thinking in the mind, that the Gathas that came about based on the previous Indo-Iranian Aryan understanding of religion, which is very close to the Vedic side, was kind of changed by the coming of Zarathustra, who took us away from many of the stuff. We made it much more of a religion based on the mind. And all of that somehow got lost after Zarathustra passed away. You don't see much of that happening until it suddenly comes up in the Achaemenian or Hachemenish times. But even there, the the previous system, etc., is too strong to completely let go. And of course, in the Sasanian period, it becomes a lot more entrenched in that quote unquote Indo-Iranian Vedic type of a religion. We are not Vedic, a whole bunch of entities and a whole bunch of that are not there in Zarathustra's teaching, etc. Indra and things like that. But I was trying to see what actually is there in the Sasanian teachings of the Mobids at that time before the Muslim conquest and after. That really is Zarathustra's teaching. There is that. I know this is a beautiful story. It is to me romantic and it is Romeo and Juliet. And, you also have the same concept of the two lions in Bahram Gur. Remember the story of Bahram? He also has to get the throne fighting the two lions. So this, to me, are patterns of stories that are picked up from one author to another and promulgated much more in their own times. And then the question of going to heaven and hell and Ardhaviraf comes into picture at that time. So what I'm really trying to say is, by doing all this, are we actually getting away from Zarathustra's Gothic teachings and trying to justify it with all this other stuff? It's a very broad question, I understand.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mehta. Yes, we've talked about this before, I remember. Yes, alas, I don't think I have a good answer for this. Yes, perhaps depends. Depends how you would say it. I mean, we did mention earlier, was brought up, yes, there's something from the teachings within the Gathas that permeates through later productions, including this text. Yes, but as to the actual truth of essentializing what is the truth of Gathas, etc., it's not my place to mention or talk about or articulate about that, unfortunately. But yes,
thank you very much. Thank you very much for these thoughts. We invite people to continue this discussion offline. We thank our speaker, Dr. Rastin Mehri, and each one of you for contributing. Our series has involved Mr. Rusi Dalal, trustee at TFE, Mr. Saroj Zaiwal, a prominent jurist, Mr. Sir Rohinton Khalifa, a very important person to contribute to youth education, and now Dr. Rastin Mehri. And in the future, we will have scholars and people of the faith with this whole concept of education, sharing, and building a network of dynamic learned speakers as an asset to the world and bridging the Zoroastrian community, scholars, and the laity, who also have a lot of wisdom. So my gratitude to the Zoroastrian Trust Funds of Europe for hosting us, and we thank all of participants. We can stay on to continue the discussion, if you like, after the recording stops. Thank you, Mami, for being with me and all our participants online.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehri.
Thank you.